Welcome to Half-Assed Garage, my little humble shop in my backyard. Doing this video on how to do the tilt front clip on a Chevy square body truck. For those that don't know what a square body is, it's a 73 to 87 Chevy pickup. And this is how I did my tilt front clip. This is just a stock steel front clip, nothing special. I do have a fiberglass one, but money's tight with the coronavirus, so I didn't have the money for supplies to make that work. So I said, fuck it. And I'm cutting up the steel clip to make it work. So, this is a 76 GMC with an 86 front clip on the front. Why did I use an 80s clip? Because it was free and the stock one I had on it was rusted to hell. That's really the main reason. So, this first video, I will start with preparations. I'll do another video on supplies and parts that I used. And I'll do a last video of the actual process of how I did it. And maybe another video with some other issues and little things you had to get done. So, firstly, what I started with was I removed the cowl and removed the hood and obviously the inner fenders. You really don't need inner fenders, and it would be a nightmare to try to get them to work with this setup. So if you want to do a tilt front clip, don't even count on inner fenders unless you have the patience, but I can't tell you how to make them work. And I just welded my hood to the clip. Because if you're one of those people that wants to make the hood still open and close, don't bother, because if your whole front end tilts forward, why the hell do you want to open the hood? It's just pointless. So, to start, remove inner fenders, remove your hood, and I'll open this up and get to the rest of the details. Oh, also I should mention, you want to remove your bumper, the grill, and the bumper filler little panel that goes there, because they're probably going to bottom out on the frame. And in another video, I'll try to tackle attaching my bumper to the core supports and cutting the front edge of the frame off so nothing hits when you open it and tilt it forward. But for now, this is as far as I've gotten. So, when I started, I just had a piece of angle iron. This right here. It's just bed frame rail. It's cheap. Most people have shit laying around they don't use, so you can get it for free even. And I just tack welded it to the fenders right towards the back there, kind of behind the brake booster. Also, I had to remove the windshield wiper motor because it was in the way for that, but you can put that back on pretty easily. It's 3 bolts holding it to the firewall, and then one simple nut holding on the mechanic for the wipers themselves. So it's easy to remove. Also, you have to remove the little diamond for your fuse block crap, whatever you call it. It's just 2 bolts, and then it's out of the way. And then that piece of angle iron will easily go right across the back. You may have to remove your breather too, depending on how big it is. Mine conveniently went behind it. That just holds the fenders in place and everything, and keeps everything square, lined up while you're cutting, shaping, and everything. It makes it a little more manageable. Next, you just unbolt your fenders and your core support, all connected to the fenders, of course. You just unbolt the fenders from the body of the truck and undo your bolts for the core support. Next, your wires going to your headlights, they're all color coded once you get them out of the loom thingy. So don't worry about that. And you should have plenty extra. You're going to want to wire in a clip, a plug, so you can do like a quick connect, disconnect if you ever want to remove it. So just pick a spot near the front that works for you. Wrap tape around both ends of your cut so everything stays together nice and neat and out of your way. You can wire that shit up later. By the way, don't be afraid of any of this kind of stuff, because I am learning everything as I go, and it's really not that hard. You can learn how to do any of this on your own, so don't be intimidated. Alright, once you have the wires cut, all that other stuff, then you can easily remove your fenders. Well, I guess also after you remove your inner fenders and any other crap like the jack, your battery tray. Your battery tray is going to have to go on the firewall. I made one out of a jerry can holder. And some of them have the little tank with the extra vacuum or whatever for your brakes. I removed that. I'm running a very simple race truck style setup, so I have the bare necessities in here, just the bare essentials. And you're going to have to make a little puke tank for your radiator overflow. But once you get your clip off, one thing you're going to have to do is notch the bottom of the core support. Is the radiator would normally sit on this, so you're going to want to cut this flat part off in between the pillars here. You don't really have to go to the outside of the pillars. I just went from the inside across, just the very flat part on the bottom. I just took an angle grinder and cut it all the way across from outside of the pillar to the outside of that pillar, because you're going to have to make a frame for your radiator to mount directly to your frame, to your chassis. Once again, I used a bed frame rail, and I made it so I could use rubber bushings to mount it to the frame. They're just like $20, basic generic ones from O'Reilly's. That way it absorbs all the shocks and all that crap. It has wiggle room, it can move, because your hoses will relatively hold it in place on its own. But I did weld ears on my frame, so if I want to make supports going to the frame or to the firewall, I have that option. Next, you're going to want to run an electric fan and give yourself enough room to get as close to the motor as you can. Every little bit of clearance you get between the radiator and that firewall or core support when it comes up is going to help. It only brought it forward a couple inches, I'd say, but I needed it. This electric fan I wouldn't recommend. It's out of a Chevy Venture, a van, and it was a bitch to get the fit to it. As you can see, I had to do all kinds of cutting on the plastic of itself to get it to mount. But it was cheap, and I made it work, which is the story for this whole build. Alright, now you got your core support off. You got the radiator support notched. See, the next step, while your fenders are still mounted, tack welded to that support across, now basically you just set it on the ground and cut it. I set it nose down so it was straight up on the ground. And the only issue with that is this little support for that bumper gap filler panel, it bent from the weight of standing up on it. It just bent over, which it doesn't matter. It stood up straight and sturdy once that bent over out of the way. You could just leave that until you're done, or there's 2 bolts, you could just take that whole panel off. I let it bend and just sat there until I was done, then I bent it back. And how I cut my fenders next, I stayed underneath that distinct body line in the fender because I didn't want to interrupt that. So I started right under the edge of the line. And so there's like a couple holes where the badge goes on the fender. See, there's the second hole. And that's how I lined up my line to cut it. I just took a piece of masking tape, so I had a straight line. So I started with my first dot here under that body line, and the second line was right around here where the second hole for that badge was. So I just put that line across the middle of that hole and just continued straight till I got to the wheel well. And that's just how I made my line. I only made the line on the outside because I used a Sawzall to cut all the way through. I wouldn't recommend a Sawzall because once you get to the middle of this, it gets real shaky and violent, and it makes it difficult to keep that line straight. I'm impatient, so I said fuck it and just cut through it anyway. So I'd recommend a cutoff wheel on an angle grinder. I'll go over the tools and stuff that I use in another video. So cutoff wheel through your outer, then your inner. I just kept them at the same line. Then, once you get that cut off, I start with mounting the bottom halves of the fenders. So, I mounted the bottom as you do normally, the shims or whatever, and I mocked it up using the gap in the door. It's a little off right now because I have some adjusting, so it could be closer to the door up top. But I started with bolting it on at the bottom, got the gap where I wanted it, followed the gap up top, had it straight, but it got knocked loose whenever the fender from the clip came down. Got that bolted in place, and then I made a bracket. Because when you cut the way I did, you still have 1, 2, 3 holes from where you usually mount the inner fenders to the outer. And I just used that clip that the bolt goes through, and I bolted from that to this inner fender mount. I had this bracket just laying around, but it worked pretty good. I had one bracket, and I had to copy it with a piece of scrap metal and a hammer and a clamp, just bending it on my bench. It's pretty easy to do. You may be able to go straight over whatever. I wanted to have this angle because it comes out further down here and then goes in up top. You could just bend this ear in and go over with a straight piece. But it's up to you, however you want to do this bracket. I basically just found shit, made it work, bend the bracket to however the fender needs it. And I did that on both sides. And however you line up the bracket, just use your door as your guide. Because you want it right in line with that door, and you want the gap small enough it doesn't look bad, but big enough your door doesn't catch it when it opens, because that was an issue I had before. Now do that on both sides. Then you can start on the upper half. And I'll do that in the next video.